Hey there and welcome. You are listening to the Parkview Global Podcast. We are so excited for you to join the conversations between our global missions hosts and our amazing guests. Don't forget to follow our social media accounts at Parkview Global. Now, enjoy the podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Parkview Global Podcast. My name is Bill Carroll and I am the global pastor at Parkview Christian Church right outside of Chicago. And as always, I am joined by Christy Mullen, our Africa coordinator.
Hello everyone.
We want you to invite you to follow along with us as we welcome a different one of our global partners on the podcast each month. I am very excited about today's conversation. Today we are joined by one of Parkview's global partners that has served in churches in China for many years. And just a heads up at the beginning of this episode that there are several security issues involved for this partner, so we won't be using his real name or specific locations in China. But I let him pick his own name for the episode, and he chose Kyle. So welcome to the podcast, Kyle.
Thanks, Bill. Happy to be here.
So first things first, we always like to start with the really heavy questions. So when returning back to the United States during all this COVID craziness and everything, what was like the one food or restaurant in America that you were looking forward to get to eat while you're here?
Oh, definitely. Well, it's a tie, Mexican and barbecue.
Nice.
So, and we, when we first got back, we were in a place where we had sandwiches for lunch every day for a couple weeks. So we haven't been to Subway since. Now, we like Subway.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful place. Normally, that's one of our choices, but not this time.
Nice. Well, how about you come back here, is American Chinese food, is it like just laughable? It's probably completely different than what food is in China.
Yeah, my kids have a lot to say about that.
I bet they do.
You can get real Chinese food. You just got to know where
good.
to look and stuff. And normally if you go to a restaurant, you say, well, do you eat this? Well, what would you eat? Because a lot of them have,
Right.
Chinese people who are cooking in there, so they know how to cook the real stuff.
And then some Chinese places in the United States have everything from Chinese food to sushi, which is completely two different places.
There you go.
combined.
Well, in China you can buy sushi too, so.
All right, so Kyle, you have an amazing life story. And if you would, start us from the beginning and tell us about your path and how you got to China and really how God took you there.
Yeah. No, I'd love to. Well, first, I never wanted to be in global missions growing up. Honestly, I thought some of the people I knew, they're great people, but I thought some that I knew were like, we called them mission geeks. And there were some, and our theory was they were going to go overseas because they really didn't fit into American culture. And I knew a classmate in college who went, and I was like, no, you're like normal, don't go. What are you doing? And then I was, over a period of time, I was at a conference and somebody spoke, and I didn't want to go, but I started praying for missions. In fact, I started fasting one meal a week and spending that time to pray for missions, but I didn't want to go. And then the actual guy who spoke came to my college campus. And I ended up across the table from him at lunch one day. And he's like, well, what are you doing this summer? And well, what about going overseas on one of our teams? And this was actually to another country in Europe. And I went, I need to get some ice cream. And so I said, well, I'll pray about it. And my first thought was, yeah, but if I do this, I have to ask people for money. And I don't want to ask people for money. But I agreed to pray about it and felt like God had said, yeah, take this step and we'll see what happens. And then afterwards I came back, still no plans to go overseas. I had a great adventure that summer. But then I came back and I was working on other stuff. And that same guy called and said, well, would you come pray about working full time? And I thought, but then, it's easier to get churches and people to give a one-time gift than monthly.
Yeah.
I was like, oh. So again, I prayed, fasted about that, and in different ways, God, I think, confirmed that I should move in that direction. And so, lo and behold, this is where I am. So I left the job I was doing at the time and went straight to the office of this mission organization. And 2 days later, we were planning trips and recruitment for the coming year. And he said, hey, what about leading a group to China? I was like, what? So I didn't I never had like the handwriting on the clouds. Kyle, go to China, right? But our whole strategy was based on need. Because at the time, if you looked at the numbers, most missionaries went to places that already had missionaries. And so our organization was focused on the place the least reached. And again, at the time, if you looked at a list of the least reached cities of the world, like 6 or 7 of them were in China. I mean, Tehran was at the top, and then the rest of these cities were in China. And so I was like, all right, I've never done that before, but let's see. And so that's kind of how that journey started. So I went there and led some summer people and had a lot of adventures. And then after a couple short-term trips, I ended up staying. And then found a job, learned language. Thought I'll go for a couple years. Well, I'm more equipped now than I was 2 years ago. Why go home now? I was single at the time. And then one year led to another, and it's like, why? I spent all this time learning language. I'd felt no call to come back. And, many years later, here we are.
You're still doing it. Yeah.
Awesome.
So, what do you think it was, though, that helped you decide to stay there? So you said the writing wasn't really on the wall for you, but so why did you stay then?
I think the need and building relationships with people and seeing the need. So when I first went, things were a little different now. And the church in China has a lot more resources. But many years ago when I went, some of the Christians we work with we don't have any other training options and equipping options. And there just weren't as many Christians then as there are now. And so part of it was the need, and then the need shifted. So after I was there a few years, we started, we're going to go and we're going to share the gospel with people really low key, and we're going to be careful and not make a lot of noise. And, everybody kind of goes trying to find the local Apostle Paul, right? Who's the one who's going to be fruitful and multiply? And so that was how we started. Well, then later on, I read about some interviews with large network leaders. And they said, you know what, honestly, it's much easier for us to share the gospel with people. Now, we kind of share the gospel and then they kind of fall through the cracks, and then cults are eating up our people, and we need help with Bible and theology training. And I thought, well, I'm more gifted at teaching than sharing the gospel, so this feels like a pretty good fit. So I actually shifted gears, and instead of teaching at a university, I started traveling more and would go to different cities and had a contact, and we called it in the industry, it's called the van at night thing. Tinted windows, and sometimes through toll booths, they'd kind of put a coat over my head. And you go in, sometimes an apartment in the city, sometimes a farmhouse, and you just stay there. It feels a little bit like quarantine, but you don't go in, you don't go out. In fact, one time they're like, okay, the women's Bible study's coming over to this house now. They don't know you're here, so you are going to use the bathroom, and you're going to stay in your bedroom and lock the door for 2 hours until they leave, because we don't want them to know that you're here, because they'll talk. And so I did that training, but then even somebody challenged me. He said, you know what, you bop around from place to place, and you do this 3 days, you do this 3 days. In 10 years, what fruit are you going to have from it? It's helpful, but so that was a challenging thing. And then we shifted, and now the focus is on simple, reproducible, and that $1 million question, what are you going to leave behind? And so one of my coworkers, he said, Kyle, the only thing that really matters is what I leave behind when I head home. And so when it's simple, reproducible, the more people you leave behind who can share the gospel, the more people who can lead a discipleship Bible study that's, again, really simple and reproducible, where they really engage the Word of God, they really build community, they really obey, they encourage one another to obey and share, and you communicate that this is the normal Christian life. And the more people who can read and interpret and understand the Word of God for themselves and can even get a group of leaders together to sharpen each other, it's like, it's like Uber church, right? You crowdsource ministry.
Amen. Yeah.
And when we trained some locals in this. One of the members said, you know what, the shift that happened was our focus before this was how do we get more and more people into our building? And now our thought is, how do we take the church out where the people are? And so it's like, all right. And if I were not to be able to go back now, there are people who right now are able to start groups and who have raised up leaders who can start groups and are equipping people in how to share the gospel and do these things.
That's
and
success
now,
right
would it
there.
continue?
Yeah.
It can all stop tomorrow. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, that's what we're aiming for, and we're praying for a movement.
Yeah. Chrissy, did you catch how smoothly he used his own fake name?
did.
That was really good. So, you talk about, the need being the thing that drew there. Is it ever overwhelming? Because, I'm just looking there's 2 cities over 20 million in China. There's there's 4 over 10 million, another 25 that are over 1 million. Is that overwhelming, or is that just oh man, the possibilities are endless?
I have not felt overwhelmed by it. Maybe because, when you're in a city of let's say 5 million, 10 million, whatever, you're like, well, how much can one person do, right? So whether I lived in a city of 1 million or 100,000 or 20 million, it's kind of the playbook is the same.
Good.
Right? It's you engage with people and you look for people who, you got 2 choices. They're believers and you try to challenge them and equip them to be fruitful, or they're not believers and you look for opportunities to share the gospel with them. So we go chit-chat conversations, meaningful conversations, spiritual conversations, and if the door's open, share the gospel. And it doesn't matter where you live. And, keep a list of people that you're praying for and trying to engage with. Anybody can do that anywhere. One of the people we trained, this was her comment. She said, the cool thing about these really simple small groups is, you go over to someone's house, you open up the Bible, you can start a small group anywhere.
Awesome.
And so I have met people who are overwhelmed by that. It's like, oh no, it's like I got to stand before God. I got to try to reach 10 million people. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, you don't. God never called you to try to reach 10 million people.
Good.
Jesus didn't try to connect with 10 million people when he was on this earth.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. I think I'm excited to have you speak into this next one a little bit, because I think for most Americans, they hear about the churches in China. It's kind of this mysterious thing, and there's really, it can be quite complex, because there are some government-approved churches that are allowed to exist, and they're monitored very closely, and they have regulations. And then there's thousands of churches that are independent. We refer to as underground churches or whatever, and they exist outside of the government's knowledge or approval or whatever. Like you said previously to us, they probably know a lot more than they let on to. But talk to us a little about the churches in China and how they function, and maybe some of the specific challenges.
Yeah. Oh, happy to. In America, we often have a very clear black and white distinction. It's legal or it's not, right? It's open or it's underground. Whereas it may be more helpful to think of the church situation in China like the speed limit sign of 55, right? So sometimes you get busted for driving over 55.
I don't know what you're talking about, Kyle.
I know it, yeah. Whereas, if you're in Chicago, and you're only doing 65 in a 55 zone, you could get hurt by people driving by. See, and so it's more nuanced than that. And so you've got government-approved churches in buildings led by pastors who have gone to approved seminaries, and you're going to have a gamut of those. In fact, some of them, part of their culture would be similar to the church, maybe that they were, some of those were started by outside missionaries, say 100 plus years ago. And so ones that were originally Lutheran are going to have a little different style, the Presbyterians, and so some of them have retained some of that. And they'll have a variation on ministry and stuff, but don't think like government-approved churches are liberal and the underground ones, you know, good guys and bad guys kind of thing. You've got the whole gamut. And some are very passionate about the gospel. Sometimes they get along really well. We call them unregistered.
Good.
Partly because some have been quite large. I mean, I've heard of ones that were a few hundred people, even 1,000. And you can't hide a church of 1,000. And they never tried.
Right.
Right, I've gone into office buildings and seen, you know, that little first floor wall with floor 1, floor 2, floor 3, and you know this floor and the name of a church is on there, right? And you know the authorities know they're not stupid, but sometimes like when you're driving over 55, nobody's getting hurt, traffic's moving along, everything's okay, the cop lets it go.
Yeah.
So you know nobody wants anything going down on his or her beat. So as long as nothing's going down, then we'll let it go. But if my boss says I got to do something, then I'll do something. Or if something happens, right? Somebody calls us up and complains, like here, they would have to do something. And so it's varied on how that relationship has worked over the years. So sometimes they're very hostile toward each other. And I've heard of places where a government-approved church, if they hear about an unregistered church, will call the authorities and report them. Other places, they work together on projects. In some cases, approved churches have asked the unregistered churches for resources and stuff. I was talking with one guy, and I was like, so, you know, you're with like government approved. He's like, we don't talk about government approved. We don't talk about not approved. We're just here to preach the gospel. If we do that, we're good.
Nice.
I was like, hey, bless you. And so, and then there are some approved churches, if the restrictions get high, then they've switched and become unregistered.
Wow.
And so it's really much more nuanced. And I mean, you can have underground churches or unregistered ones with all kinds of problems. I mean, people are people, churches are churches. And even sometimes heroes, you know, they may be really passionate or have survived persecution, but managing a church complicated, managing finances, you know, people aren't perfect, so they're great people, but I bet most of the problems you'd see in a church here, you scratch far enough, you'd see similar ones.
For sure.
There. I met another guy, he's like, you know, depending on how long you've been in leadership, if you get caught by the police, and they want to fine you, because if you negotiate with them, you can get the fine down. And so, you know, if you're really young and inexperienced and you give up real quick, okay. But if you've been a church leader very long, you can't give up that quick. You got to negotiate longer, right? You know, they're like different expectations and stuff. And so you get it across the gamut. One of the cool things now is more and more churches are getting a vision to send out missionaries.
Cool.
And some have said, you know, we've been blessed by outsiders. You know, we got a large church. I mean, it's not like our country's poor anymore. It's our turn to be a blessing to the nations.
Wow.
And so, you know, I talked with the guy who said, I know our network has people in 20 plus different countries.
So what are one or two things that might really draw the attention of the government to a church?
A foreigner being involved.
Yeah.
And so the rules are very different. And so one of our biggest security concerns are that other local people will talk about us and mention us because they're more free with communication. Yeah. Now, the security situation's tightened more in the last 3 years than I've ever seen it.
Really?
And so, yeah. And so you remember I said, like the cop, when their boss says you have to do something, well, their bosses have told them they have to do something.
Wow.
And it started about 3 years ago. Before that, they would all talk freely. So small group, you get a small group in your church. They form a social media group. They send prayer requests. They send Bible verses. Nobody worried about anything. And, you know, nobody's getting hurt. Nobody's causing problems. They're teaching people to love each other. The authorities would let it go. And then suddenly it gets a little tighter and churches get visited. And it happened all over the country. Wow. So there was always places where one place is strict and another place is loose. But the last 3 years, it's been more uniform across the country. And a lot of churches had a plan to, they would tell their people, we may not be meeting as a large group next Sunday. So if that happens, here are the small group leaders, here are the homes where we're going to meet, here's who's in what home. So just wait, you get the text, this is where you go the next Sunday. Now, some have never used that plan, and others went ahead and started doing it before the authorities told them to. And then others were told to, you get the whole gamut. But people have had to be a lot more careful.
Yeah. Okay, you're going to love this next question. So, speaking for myself and probably a lot of other people who have done on the field missions work outside the country, we've all daydreamed about getting kicked out of our country. There's some kind of like mini martyrdom thing there or something. I don't know what. But for you, that has come for real close a few times. And will you tell us a little bit about some of your experiences? It's obviously China is a huge country, very involved in the global market. So there's expats, I'm sure, everywhere. But as a white guy, that's can stand out, I'm sure, at times. Like for you, what has that been like, especially somebody who really wants to help the church grow, but at the same time has to be careful in some capacities in China? Tell us some stories.
Yeah, so no, I heard some preacher years ago, and I don't know, maybe it's not just people overseas, but it's, you imagine, all right, here's the statue to commemorate the place where Kyle gave his life to Jesus, or was kicked out. And I feel it. Different personalities. Some people are I only see possibilities. Well, that is not me. I can find a potential problem in any situation. Every single time I have gone somewhere to teach or train, the question came up, is this it? Is somebody going to walk in? And it happened once, and
wow.
I wondered if this was it. It's like texting my wife, pray, and a friend was with her, and was like, ooh, that's bad. So I thank God that I'm still there, and so we do wonder, and it's a tension. We're careful, and there are a number of dynamics involved. One is we're really concerned about the threat to the local people that we know, and so there's always a cost-benefit analysis. Am I adding more value or am I adding more risk?
Good. And
generally, we let the local people make that decision, and some people say, yeah, no, we're going to work with you. Other times they're like, yeah, no, we can. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. We can bring you in. We can have 100 people. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. All it takes is one person to start texting or take a photo, or this is really cool, and you got problems. Now, the advantage of that is our goal is to be reproducible, and so it's a lot easier for people to realize, it's better to get 3 or 4 people to learn this and then turn around and reteach it. Because we're hoping for, multiplication, and we're hoping for a movement. And the ideal would be almost nobody even knows about us, that these foreigners were ever involved. May it all be done locally and indigenously. But sometimes there's kind of prestige or something. I want to hear the foreigner, and we try to just play that down. We've learned language fairly well, and so there's always, with a new group, there's always, oh, wow, right, you speak our language. It's like, can we just get over that and get on with the work, and get on what we're here to do, and so that's the ideal. And so the increased restrictions make it easier to kind of convince people, no, we're not doing a big group.
Good, yeah.
What does it look like to multiply? And even, and we don't, here you're planting a church, you would love to get a lot of people. But for us, 2 people who will turn around and start groups is way more valuable than we lead groups for 500. Right? And so, keep your eyes on the goal and the focus.
That's good. And you've alluded to it a little bit, but you have a very specific set of skills, which are awesome. Can you explain how you help churches in China equip church leaders?
It's changed a bit over the years depending on the dynamic. At first it was sometimes we teach Bible. At one point, how do you preach or teach? Now the focus and the needs of the church have changed, and so some, Bible overview, Old Testament, New Testament. But as the church grew and developed, and they developed their own indigenous ways of providing Bible theology training. So a lot of them have access to that. I know of groups, they're like, okay, our church has a 2-year one, and we've got a 3-year one, we've got a 1-year one. And now it varies in the country. And so more recently, the churches have asked, how do we engage the city in ministry?
Cool.
And so, it's not uncommon for urban churches to have small group ministries, to have even marriage ministries, worship teams, some cross-cultural stuff, and various ways of helping the poor. People have talked with me. It's like, can you help us get money? We want to get a place to take care of the elderly. I mean, in China, there's a rapidly aging population. And so they're realizing, how are we going to care for all these people? At the same time, they're trying to set up a social security system from scratch. I mean, can you imagine basically shifts that have happened in America in 100 years have happened in a generation or two in China? I mean, the scale of the challenges they have to deal with just boggles the mind. And so we feel like the simple, reproducible approaches are great for the needs of the moment right now. I mean, they're always useful, but they're looking, how do we engage? How do we equip people to engage? And we also use, I don't call it a flexible consultant or coaching approach, instead of, all right, here are the 3 things I do. You want them or not? But it's more of a, hey, how you doing? What are your challenges? And you got to earn trust
More
with people.
individualized.
When someone talks to you, that the real question in meeting number 1 is, do I even want to have meeting number 2?
Right.
And so what's going on, and can we add value with those conversations? Because like many church leaders here, church leaders there are lonely. And there's a cultural, we call it a power distance or a power gap. It's a higher view of positional authority. If people disagree with you here, they have no problem with telling you about it. And they'll vote one way or the other, but they have a greater respect for positional authority. That doesn't mean they agree with them or even like them, but the boss says so, and we're more likely to go along with it. But it also can lead to loneliness and a lack of accountability and support for church leaders. And so sometimes just, one guy I talked with, he said, you just ask me good questions. So, okay, how you doing with your wife? How you doing with your kids? How you doing with your family life? And, as opposed to just working all the time.
That's awesome. So tell us, what are you excited about right now in the church in China?
I'm excited about more and more people shifting to this. Everybody gets involved in ministry mindset and paradigm. I'm excited because the church is moving towards sending out their own missionaries and cross-cultural involvement. And I don't know, the word that comes to mind is they're growing up, in the sense of, sometimes we talk to people, when we started, it was like they only had one resource. They had very few resources available. And now it's more of a, okay, we need your help now, but we don't need this, we don't need this, we don't need this. And so it's a much more peer, relationship, and they feel very comfortable saying, yeah, we're good. We really don't need any more help in this area. But hey, we do need help with this, and it's much more of a partnership. So that's really cool and exciting to see.
Very cool.
Yeah, I love what you just said, that level of maturity. We want to see all of our people living life on mission, every person living life on mission. So when I think about that, and when I hear about the way you kind of got into long-term missions, I wonder what you would say to somebody who's sitting in the same seat you were in several years ago, wondering what to do next. What's the next step? Am I am I waiting for this vision, or am I just taking the next step? I'd wonder what kind of advice you would offer.
I would say take the next step. And no matter who you are, own the Great Commission as part of your calling. I mean, that's whenever we do a training, we start with the Great Commission. It's like, who is this for? Pastors, missionaries, elders, who? Everybody, A, B, C, D, everybody. And everybody says everybody. And so, okay, what does it mean to be living out the Great Commission? You be a disciple and you make disciples. And so are you praying for people you know who are Christians and non-Christians? Are you seeking opportunities to have spiritual conversations with them? I mean, don't beat them up upside the head and go, hey, how you doing? And jump right into it. Just get to know them. Love people. Find out who's open. Are you equipped? If someone says, yeah, I'm interested in spiritual things, would you know what to do then? Get equipped to do that. And there are lots of resources to help with that. Can you lead groups? Can you help equip people? It's not that complicated. One thing is people are super busy, so find ways to do it in the spaces of our lives, and you can make a difference for eternity by jumping on board with this. Yeah. So, the great invitation. What are you waiting for?
That's great.
That is awesome. So Kyle, how can we be in prayer? How can our listeners be in prayer for you and your family and the work that you are on mission for?
A lot of the standard stuff. Pray for open doors for the gospel. Pray for God to raise up leaders who will multiply and catalyze. We pray for his kingdom to come in the city where we live and all the millions of people. We pray for every believer to get involved in mission and realize I can do this. God wants me. He has uniquely gifted me to have my part in this, and that they would step into that.
Love it.
Love it too. I'm excited just listening to you. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. And Parkview is so honored to be partnering with you and just to get to be a part of what God's doing in China. Can't wait to see what God does next. We want to let our listeners know that they can check the show notes. We've included some general information on how churches are planted and growing in China. And also in the notes, you'll find links to more information on each of Parkview's global partners and how you can get connected. Thank you so much for joining us. God bless.